Hello, classmates. I wanted to talk about the Wells Fargo scandal. This week in class, we talked a lot about how a culture of a company can drive a company. We talked about an example like J&J, how the rock outside of the CEO's office helps him make ethical decisions. The book talks about how the CEO and management create the culture and drive the success. And all companies have a code of ethics, but that doesn't mean they live by them. Like at HP, where they're printed on the wall. They hand them out on the first day, no one looks at it, and it's forgotten. In Wells Fargo's case, their ethical issue happened when they fired 5,300 bankers because they faked over 2 million accounts and were forging signatures, faking debit cards, faking credit cards, and making PIN numbers to activate them at the ATM. There's a little political cartoon in the corner kind of about what was going on. I wondered, how could this happen where 5,000 employees faked this many accounts? What type of corporate culture and pressure exists to drive them to do this? And there are a couple of aspects that led to this behavior. First is the banking culture. There are four main players who are fighting to be at the top. This makes an inherent high-pressure sale on employees to beat the competition, when in reality there aren't a lot of differences. They all have ATMs and debit cards and credit cards are all nationwide. There's not that big of a difference. And I was looking at some testimonies from people who worked at Wells Fargo, not necessarily people who created fake accounts, but just bankers who worked at Wells Fargo and experienced the high pressure sales, the harsh culture, the hostile work environment. And after I read this article from NPR, I could sympathize with the conclusions that they came to. If you have a level 1 cognitive moral development, they'll do anything to please their boss and avoid punishment. They want to remain obedient, and that is what happened. So let's read a couple. Employees say they're expected to sell 20 products a day. Tears, crying, constantly getting pulled into the back room, having one-on-ones for coaching sessions. And I think it's funny they use the word coaching sessions like a euphemism. We're going to learn what coaching session actually means here. Sit down at a large conference table, no windows in the room. They shut the door and lock it. She then says managers would give her a formal warning and tell her to sign it, and then tell her, if you don't meet your solutions, you're not a team player. If you're bringing down the team, then you'll be fired, and it'll be on your permanent record. Could we have seen this coming? For sure. The industry is unique because it's so highly regulated, but they always find unethical ways to lose your money. For this example, we could have seen it coming though. In 2013, 4 to 5 years before the story broke, they fired 30 employees for faking accounts, which means Wells Fargo knew to some extent that this was going on. And another warning sign would be the lack of corporate responsibility. I said earlier that I sympathize with the employees who did this because it was really a failure from the top down. The employees are at fault. What they did was unethical, but they felt like they were backed into the corner with only one option. The corporation was at fault for making them feel like this. The performance management by the managers, like we saw in the last slide, was terrible. The language they use to portray their message was terrible. And we talk about getting fired. Being fired is usually not a good idea for anyone, right? You work with them 40 hours a week. You hang out together. You have an established social status. They don't want to be fired. They're going to fake accounts so they don't get embarrassed in front of their communities. So all these warning signs led up to all these unethical decisions that happened across the nation with over 5,000 employees. It wasn't a misalignment of formal and informal systems that caused unethical behavior, but both systems working together to actually create the unethical behavior. Bad apples. CEO creates or can change the culture. When this broke, the CEO of Wells Fargo said that the employees were bad apples and it doesn't reflect the culture. According to the NPR, the fakes were happening at the headquarters. The CEO isn't taking responsibility for his organization and blaming workers for the poor culture he created. If there are 5,000 bad apples, it means they came from a bad tree. I was looking at their code of ethics, and one of the values is actually ethics. Um, Johnson and Johnson said customer first, employees second, shareholders third. But Wells Fargo says, in the code of ethics, act ethically, which is so vague there's no way that could actually help anyone and guide them on the path to make the correct ethical decision. So, what's happening now and how has it changed? What are my recommendations for Wells Fargo? And what are my predictions for the future? So they have a new CEO. They're running a new campaign called Reestablish in 2018. I'm sure you've seen the commercials of the horse riding off into the sunset, and it says Reestablish in 2018. They removed the sales target for retail staff. Now, I can't figure out how they pay commission to the real retail staff now. I'm sure they do somehow. It's kind of unclear, but it does look like a step in the right direction. My recommendation would make an entirely new ethical code and put the code as an observable artifact. Put it in the centers, on the door, put them on the desks, make it so repetitive that it might even sound like a joke, but it'll get employees to live by it. Regaining the trust needs transparency. Wells Fargo needs to advertise transparency and explicitly show on statements what is going on in the fee structure. Establish that managers have a duty to lead and support their employees. Like in the Ford Chemical video, they need to eat last and return time and energy to the subordinates instead of shoving sales down their faces. I couldn't find anything on how they hire the best employees from the start either. So I would implement new hiring practices and onboarding techniques to make sure they're hiring the most ethical people and that they realize the ethical structure that they're getting into. My prediction is that if the new CEO is able to create this culture and they take even more of my recommendations, we'll see few ethical dilemmas coming from Wells Fargo in the future. For benchmarking, I decided to choose Bank of America. I really like how they approach competition. They say responsible growth. Growth is in a sustainable manner. They want to beat the competition, but want to have an ethical guideline of winning the right way under the right circumstances. They want to grow with an established framework, and they don't want their sales to be under high pressure. They want to have a culture of doing the right thing over a period of time will yield the right results. Since the new B of A CEO implemented this responsible growth, the company has done tremendously well. And I'm sure if Wells Fargo follows suit and brings their own new values and ethics, they can do even better.